Right, good morning, Year 7. This is your first lesson in your next unit of work for history. Now, in today's lesson, we've got to set the background about religion because we're still looking at medieval England. And in medieval England, religion was one of the most important things. We've come a long way. Well, we've changed a lot in history. And we need to understand that religion basically dominated day-to-day life in England for a big chunk of time, up until maybe the 1700s. So what this lesson needs to look at today is why was religion so important in the Middle Ages? And by the Middle Ages, we're looking at around 1100 to 1500. So the learning outcomes for today's lesson is we need to know how medieval people practiced their faith and look at some key words. We need to understand the medieval views on heaven and hell and to understand why religion was so important to them. And then we're going to look at also ways that people thought they could go to heaven and ways to avoid hell. So the first task you're going to do today is something called inference. So an inference is a guess. You don't actually need to have any knowledge to do inference. Okay. So I want you to look at these two pictures and I want you to try and guess 5 things about heaven from the first picture and hell from the second picture. So I might infer from about heaven that it looks very peaceful. I might infer about hell that it looks very scary. After you've written an inference, just pick out a part of the photo to say why you think it. So I might think that heaven is peaceful because it looks very light and it looks very spacious. I might think that hell looks very scary because it looks like people are being tortured. All right. So your first task today is I want you just to pause the video here and I want you to write 5 things you can infer about heaven and 5 things you can infer about hell. And then your teacher will check this to see that you're right when you send your work in at the end of the lesson. Pause the video here and complete task or the starter task for this lesson. All right, so we're going to get onto the main task for today. Or one of the main tasks. So first, we're going to look at some key words, key facts about the church in medieval England. Now, what we've got to understand is, in the Middle Ages, everybody in England was Catholic. Now, when I've taught this before, some people say, really? Wouldn't some people not be Catholic? It's very unlikely, Year 7, because the chance is people were scared about not going to heaven. So everyone was a Catholic, and there were very few alternative religions at this time. It wasn't until a lot later on that we had things like Protestantism and things like that. The leader of the Catholic Church was the Pope, who lived in Rome in Italy. So the Pope was the key leader of the Catholic faith. In England, you had archbishops who ran the church. And one of the most important archbishops, which is going to be important for later on, is the Archbishop of Canterbury, which you will look at later. We'll look at one of the most famous cases in history, Archbishop Thomas Becket. The archbishops had priests that worked for them. And there were some people who gave their whole lives to the church and became monks and nuns. They shut themselves away from the world and dedicated their lives to God in a monastery. And they wrote books and they prayed. Every day they were up at around 4 or 5 o'clock. They'd pray and it would just be that continuous sort of like dedication to God throughout the day. And people who worked for the Catholic Church could not get married. Okay, in many respects, they were kind of married to God. All right. So they're the key facts and words. And your first task today is I want you to write down the key words, which are the colorful words on the right-hand side. And I want you to match up the correct statement and write it next to the word. So we've got Pope, monks and nuns, monasteries, Catholic, archbishops. I want you to write those words down, and next to those words, I want you to write the correct definition down based on what I was just talking about in the last slide. Try and do it from memory to start off with, and if you are struggling, just rewind the video to remind yourself on some of the key facts and words. This task should take you about 5 minutes. If you pause the video here, and then I will go through the answers. All right, so these are the answers. Everybody in England was this religion? Catholic. The church was led by this man, the Pope. The church in England was led by archbishops. People who devoted their entire life to the church were known as monks and nuns. And these people, monks and nuns, lived in monasteries. Now, those key words are going to be really important to today's lesson. So keep them in front of you so you can do the next few tasks. Okay, good stuff. Task number 2 today. Why was religion important? Now, this is a bit of a literacy task, year 7. We're going to do a little bit of comprehension. You've got to read this paragraph that's on the board. And you've got to write the subtitle, which is Importance of Religion. And you need to write 5 reasons why religion was important for medieval society. Now, a little challenge for you. If you can get more than 5 and show your teacher, then we'll pop you a house point on the system. Okay, I will read the paragraph out. So just listen very, very carefully. During the medieval period, religion was everything. It was not unusual for people to go to church every day and pray 5 times a day. People believed that all good things in life were due to God's blessing and that evil events of the times were due to their sins. Sins is where you do something bad. Medieval religion was extremely important, and even the doctors and physicians of the era were also very religious people. From birth to death, whether you were a peasant, a noble, or a king, life was dominated by the church and medieval religion. Even if you were the king, year 7, you have someone that's technically more powerful than you, which is the Pope and God. So even the king could potentially be threatened by this religious dominance. The church were also involved in people's lives. Monasteries and nunneries looked after the old and sick and gave alms to the poor. Monks could read and write when many other people could not. So they copied books and taught wealthy children. Monasteries also had libraries. Another thing that I'll add as well, you lot, is that in this time period, if someone was to get sick, it wouldn't be because of germs, because we didn't know about germs until 1861. It would be because they did something bad in their life. They sinned, and God was punishing them for doing something wrong. So religion dominated everything. Okay? So you need to pause the video now. Underneath your subtitle of Importance of Religion, you need to find 5 reasons why religion was important for medieval society. And if you can think of 5 any more, and your teacher sees it, we'll give you a house point at the end of this lesson once we've checked your work. All right, so pause the video here. This should take you about 7 to 8 minutes, year 7. All right, off you go. All right, last task. Well, 2 more tasks today, year 7. This one is medieval views about heaven and hell. So you need to draw this table in your book or on paper. And we're going to look at different ways to get to heaven, and also ways that would send, also actions that would send you to hell. All right. So draw this table and leave about half a page so we can actually fill stuff in this table. Quickly do that for me. That should take you 1 minute. Pause the video because I'm going to quickly move on to the information. So pause the video, and when you've done the table, click play and we can move on. Right. So how might someone end up in hell? The key thing with Christians is if you break any of the 10 commandments, then you will end up sinning and potentially go to hell. So the 10 commandments, thou shalt not have other gods before me. Thou shalt not make unto thee any graven images. Thou shalt not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain. Remember the Sabbath to keep it holy. Honor thy father and thy mother. Thou shalt not kill. Thou shalt not commit adultery. Adultery is where you basically cheat on your partner. Thou shalt not steal. Thou shalt not bear false witness against thy neighbor. So you basically won't tell lies about your neighbor. And thou shalt not covet. Okay, they're the 10 commandments. Now, if you participate also in any of the 7 deadly sins, pride, greed, wrath, envy, lust, gluttony, and sloth, then you could end up in hell. So using this information on your section that says actions that would send you to hell, write down as many things that you could do that would send you to hell, because this is going to be really important to your last task of the lesson today. So pause the video on this slide here and spend 5 minutes adding to your table what things people would do that might send them to hell. Once you're ready, you can then click play and then move on to the next task. All right, so there were four main ways of going to heaven. All right. And this is for your next part of the table. So you must go to the church and listen to the priest. Your local church can ask for a tithe. Okay. Now you pay a certain amount of money to the church, and in return, the church look after your soul. So it amounts to about 1/10 of your earnings. The priest would encourage you to be a good person and to help others. So you'd probably go to church every day. You wouldn't just go to church on a Sunday. You'd aim to go to church as often as possible, because the more you go to church, the more your soul is ready for heaven. You could become a monk or nun, but this would mean abandoning your whole life and going to live in a monastery or nunnery and spend the rest of your life being devoted to God, not getting married, being isolated, doing the job of God on a daily basis. You can buy your way into heaven. Now, some rich people would often donate a lot of money to the buildings of churches. Some people would leave money in their will to build hospitals, which were run by churches in this day, called an endowment. And religious people would also sell pardons. So a pardon is something that you can buy if you've done something wrong. You could go to your local priest and say, I would like to purchase a pardon. And then they will say prayers for you so that you can repent, take back your sin. And you may also go on something called a pilgrimage. And this was a journey to a holy site, most likely connected to a saint or a holy relic. So you go there, you touch a holy item. Some of the most religious areas you could go to were Jerusalem, which would have been maybe an 8-month walk. You could go to Rome, which is where the Pope was. But if you were staying more local, you'd go to Canterbury, which is where the base of the most important Archbishop of England. So there are lots of ways to go to heaven. If you can think of any more to put on your table, please do. So pause the video here and fill in the next section of your table, which is ways to get to heaven. Do it in lots of detail because it will be really important for the last task of the lesson. Your fourth and final task today, Year 7, is a writing task. Now, you are going to imagine that you are a medieval priest giving a sermon to your local village. And I want you to explain to the people of your village the best way to get to heaven and the ways to avoid hell. So remember, everyone was a Christian, so you want them to go to heaven when they die. Okay? And they want to go to heaven when they die. So I want you to write a 7 to 8 line speech in the viewpoint of a medieval priest, telling people the best way to get to heaven and the ways to avoid hell. Once you've completed this task today, please can you then submit your work to Satchel 1 so that your teacher can look over it and then give house points for the tasks that I mentioned in the day. Hope you enjoyed this lesson, Year 7, and we'll see you soon. Take care.